Hello everyone, welcome to Render Time. Here we chat video creators about their worst and best projects and the process that they go through in between. My name is Sean McDaniel, and today I'm speaking with cinematographer Sarah Whelden and her story from commercial projects to feature films. Sarah, hello, welcome to Render Time. It's so great to have you. We finally get a chance to chat. How are you today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm great. Monday, start to a great week. Was at South by all of half of last week and the week before, and it was really fabulous. I got to see some great films and celebrate getting through a few films myself. So yeah, super exciting.
Love it. I absolutely want to break down South by. I love Austin, so I want to talk about all the stuff you got to do out there.
Yeah.
But I would love the audience, you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do. Yeah, please share.
For sure. Yeah. No, I'm a cinematographer. I've been in the film industry for a long time, but really been working pretty full time as a cinematographer since about 2014. Started dipping my toes into those waters in about 2013, and then by 2014, I was actually working at a production company, a commercial production company, and became their mostly full-time cinematographer. I was still editing at the time, and then went freelance towards the end of that year. And I stuck to cinematography because honestly, it's the thing I'm the best at. And even when I was less experienced than I am now, I think I was a better cinematographer than I ever was a camera assistant. So, as much as I tried to live in that world a bit, it didn't last very long because frankly, I wasn't a very good camera assistant. It's
a tough job. It's its own career. So,
it's so different. And it's amazing to me how many people, it was the industry standard forever to come up through camera or lighting. But, coming up through camera, which really feels so different until you're an operator. It really feels so disconnected, or felt disconnected to me from, what my real responsibilities were as a cinematographer. So operating a bit was really helpful, and just getting to kind of observe DPs. But yeah, so in 2016, I shot my first feature, and
Nice.
that sort of gave me the narrative bug, and I've been really chasing that ever since. Still do commercials, still consider
was
myself
cinematography, I didn't mean to interrupt, was cinematography the original idea of what you wanted to do, or you just knew entertainment or being behind the camera, or was directing at all kind of part of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I studied film in college, as well as photography and music, and wasn't really sure what to do with any of that besides kind of enjoying it. The school was very documentary focused. It felt like, a great spot if you're a documentary director to kind of like get started. And I knew I wasn't that. So as a result, the music and photography really took center stage for me. And it wasn't until I graduated and then was living through the recession of, 2008 that I realized I had this realization, in my early 20s of like, I'm going to be working the rest of my life. I might as well enjoy it. And when I looked back at the three things I really enjoyed doing, the film industry seemed to be the most promising path towards being able to make a living. So I actually took some courses at a community college to try to get back into things, because this was, the dawn of the Red One, and the 5D Mark II is coming on the market, and digital cinema was not even, wasn't really a thing outside of like uh, mini DV cameras when I was in college. So it was more of a
Yep.
film world. And so coming back in, I really wanted to kind of learn that landscape. And I got an internship at a production company where I ended up working until 2014. So I spent, so many of my early years at this company sort of learning the ins and outs of how it all works, especially from a commercial perspective. But I realized pretty early on that cinematography was probably my calling. But before I even started taking those, or when I like first decided to start taking those classes at a community college, I remember thinking, maybe I'll shoot wedding videos. Maybe, it
Yep.
was really a means to an end. It was like, I had a problem, which was I didn't love my job. And the solution was to be doing something I loved that, I could sort of apply to that problem. And
Yeah.
going back to school and starting to do this work in a more professional manner, especially once I started working in the industry, I think I realized how much I love this work. And what I was missing, I think, the first time around in college was the collaborative nature of this work, which is really the core of what I love about doing this, is working with other people. And I think as a cinematographer, especially, I love helping a director realize their vision, and bringing so many different people together to just try to help heighten and make that vision both come to life and hopefully come to life sort of beyond their, imagination. So, yeah.
Do you think there's a moment that you can pinpoint where you're like, you know what? Cinematography is where I want to go. Was there a project that maybe you realized it? Or I think of it in terms of golf, like I play golf occasionally. I'm not that good at it, but most of the time you hate every shot you take, but there's those few that come along and you hit a ball really, really well and it just works and it brings you right back into it and makes you kind of love it again. Was there a moment that you realized I love this? There was maybe a shot that you did, or it was a project that you worked on that you're like, this is my calling, or this is what I want to do?
For cinematography, strictly, not exactly. I think it sort of settled in slowly. So my very first, when I started at this production company that I was an intern at, originally, uh, they had me doing some editing, which I really loved. I really loved editing. I loved that part of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still very new to it, but I think I had like a bit of a knack for it, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I think it was definitely something I was strongly considering. And while I was still an intern, I was asked if I did field audio. And so I said yes, because I desperately wanted to get hired at this company. It wasn't exactly true, but I figured I could learn. So I, took home a field audio package that night that they owned and stayed up all night long watching YouTube videos, trying to teach myself how to do field audio. I had some music background, so it wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
totally brand new, but it also wasn't, it's such a different thing.
Yeah.
And showed up. It was a really low stress shoot, which is why they, were willing to give me a shot. And um, in my memory, I was never good at field audio, but I was good enough that they were willing to hire me on, and I got better. And in that process, I, started doing bigger and bigger shoots with them as the audio recorder, and I would
Got
be
it.
on set with other DPs, and that
Mm-hmm.
I was always fascinated and most interested in what the DPs were doing, how they were lighting things. And then when I had an opportunity to start shooting with this production company, a big part of what really solidified it for me was the people I got to do it with. there was a gaffer I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. There was a gaffer named Steve Waters, who'd been around for a long time and told these great stories, but was just like so excited to teach me everything, and was so excited to just help me grow as a cinematographer. And I think it was like that kind of care that really helped me fall in love with it. And that's sort of like the long answer in terms of finding my way to cinematography. I'd say my aha moment would have been when I shot my first feature, which sort of came to me without me looking for it at all. I wasn't even considering shooting feature films. It wasn't even on my radar. I was a commercial cinematographer. I was happy doing that. The money was good enough. It was all like, it kind of checked all the boxes. And I had shot a short film for a friend, which I did just kind of for fun. And the actor was shooting a feature film and said, "Hey, I really liked your attitude on the short film. Do you want to shoot a feature for me?" And I was like, "Well, sure." So I did it, and it was really hard. We had very little resources. I, knew nothing about long form storytelling, at least in terms of like capturing something as big as a feature film script, which felt so daunting at the time, and absolutely fell in love with it. And I knew pretty immediately that that's what I wanted to do. Moving forward is really keep telling those stories. And, it didn't, I still love working on commercials, and I love that part of my job, but the love for narrative storytelling, I think, really settled in and made sense to me in a way that I think helped define who I am as a cinematographer.
That's amazing. Cinematography for me is such a important part of the storytelling. I don't think people realize that, the director and the cinematographer have a very interesting relationship. And while, some directors are a little bit more camera heavy, and some cinematographers, can lean into different ways. It's really interesting to see how people kind of come up and work their way into this. Was that project part of your worst project that you want to bring in to our story, or do you have something specific that you're like, that's the project I want to talk about, that was my biggest challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I've been racking my brain over this question, and I think the first feature certainly has so many learning moments for me. One thing I remember really clearly is like we were shooting a lot of it's handheld. I remember the director and I spending so much time breaking down the script and building a shot list, and I'd go to his house and we'd like, try to act out the scenes together and just try to figure out this thing. And I was so afraid of how big the script was and how am I possibly going to wrap my brain around it. And just all the time we put into it, realized that wasn't actually all that difficult. By the time we did all that work, I didn't even have to look at this. Like, I knew what the script was. I knew what we were trying to do. But one thing that was really interesting is I was so used to shooting commercials where, at most you hold on something for 30 seconds, but often, I would be shooting, a lot of it's branded content kind of stuff where I might be picking off B-roll moments, and you can roll on something for, 30 frames. And, that's a really useful nugget in a commercial. Yeah. And, on this feature, I remember the director having to tell me, like, you need to hold on these shots. Like, that's not useful to me. And sometimes I would just reframe in the middle of something because I think this could be better. And knowing, from my work experience, it was like, oh yeah, no, if it's like, change it if you think it can be better, because we're just going to use one little moment of this. But when it's like, no, this is a 12-minute scene and we need it to match so we can come back to it. And it's like all these things that, logically, growing up watching movies and all of that, but you don't, when you're so used to doing something one way and then you come in to a project that requires a very different process, there's just so many opportunities for breakdown. I think another component was, something unique to my career is because I started at a production company, and that's where I was working as a DP. I would be part of the pre-production process all the way through post and color. Because I was there, we were all under one roof. I knew everybody who was working on things. I heard about jobs long before they ever, booked dates, or even, like we even had check in hand and we're ready to go. So I think I was a little spoiled in that way, that I just assumed, it's like, yeah, the DP is a part of this whole part of the process, and realize kind of the hard way, both as a, commercial, freelance cinematographer, when I, left this production company, but on this feature too, like, I assumed it was like, oh yeah, the director calls you up for color when the time comes, but you have to be very prescriptive about all these steps. Otherwise things happen. And part of it is, I think it's easy to disparage directors for not bringing their people in. But one thing to, keep in mind is that directors' main goal is to get over the finish line. It's so hard to get a film done. So any like resistance to that is something that they're going to want to avoid. So, they also, especially if it's an indie project, they're not going to have a ton of money. So they may not be able to pay you to be there for color. So a mix of like, they don't want to ask for your time for free. They don't want to like try to schedule with so many people and bring in this thing that's going to slow it down. I ended up not being a part of the color process on that first feature, and like remember watching it in a festival for the first time and just like, this, I can't ever let this happen again. So it's so important to be, to have my voice in there. And so, it's a long career and you're constantly kind of like learning new things. But it's, there's certain lessons that stick with you, and it's like, okay, I need to figure that out, because that's just one that, I have to, no matter what I'm in the middle of, I could be in the middle of another feature shoot. And if it's color, like I need to at least be at the very least be reviewing, ideally, sitting in a room with the colorist and the director. So yeah, so many lessons.
So was this project, I'm curious, what genre was it? Because I mean, commercials usually are quick, they're poppy, they move. But was this like a drama? Was this a comedy? What type of
it was like project? A romantic drama. It was also the third part in a trilogy about two gay Mormons who are like, so we're like jumping into the story really late. The director's already made two of these films. There's a bit of a cult following. So the pressure
was on. You had a little bit of pressure on you.
A lot. Yeah, there was a ton of pressure. But, I will say, to the director's credit, like he was excited to take this wherever it went, Yeah. The first film he shot on a HVX 100, I want to say.
Very familiar.
Second one he shot on a red camera. And then our shoot, we shot on the original A7S camera. And we had two of them because I owned one.
Yeah.
And it was like, we had a second camera that came in because our producer owned an A7S. And, there was an issue with the camera wasn't set up to record log. It was recording Rec 709. So,
Mm.
that was a not so pleasant surprise when I realized that, and it was a bit too late. So then we had to like kind of make that feel like a stylistic choice that camera looked that way.
Yeah.
And these are things that with experience, it's like, yeah, you have your prep day and this and that, but I
Mhm.
just had less support than I was used to, for one, because it was an indie film and you're doing so much by yourself.
Yeah, that's what I
And
was going to ask. Were these commercials well funded? Like, did you have to like a huge drop in like crew and support for the feature? I would imagine so.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it wasn't totally out of the ordinary. When I was working at the production company, when I started working as a cinematographer, I mean, I always had at the bare minimum like a gaffer, a key grip, and a swing, even on a really small shoot, and then a first and second
Mhm.
AC. Um, Sometimes much more than that. When I went freelance in 2015, it was like, suddenly I'm just, trying to land whatever job I can, and budgets are
Yeah.
what they are. And it was this, the beginning of like, we'll hire you if you own a camera days. And, I owned an A7S just, for fun more than anything. And yet that, tended to be everybody's first question, or a lot of sort of producers' first question was like, what camera do you own?
Mhm.
And the ones who weren't scared off by that would often want to use it. And I'm like, oh, we could rent from a rental house and get something, and they're like, no, we don't want to do this. So, so I'd often kind of like, shoot on my A7S. I might have no crew. The only thing I was like, really strict about was I always required somebody do audio,
Yeah.
because
Oh yeah.
as I told you, that's what I started doing in the industry, and realized I was never very good at it. And to try to do that in anything else, it's just like pressure that I didn't want, because you
It's
can't
very
screw up
hard.
audio. It's
It's
hard, and you can't
it's
screw
hard
it up. And
and
there
it's
was
so
no
important.
tools to clean. You couldn't clean things up like you can now. And it's like,
Yeah.
and that's not to say like it's still like absolutely one of the hardest jobs on set, and it's so important, and nobody gives you the time of day. It's just like, it's just expected you're going to do a great job, and you're going to be minimally invasive to the production and this and that. So yeah, so it was this kind of like a big change for me. I think it came during just going freelance and just
Mhm.
like realizing like, oh, I have to set up this light myself. And I knew how to tell a gaffer where I wanted light coming from and what quality of light.
Yeah.
But I, actually realized like I wasn't very good at understanding what unit they might use,
Mhm.
and how they might accomplish that. So I was learning a lot just trial by fire, and like, all right, great. I'm going to set up this light here and try to do it like this and see how it goes, and pull my own focus. So I got pretty good as much as you can with doing
Yeah.
everything yourself. I mean, there's limitations. I was pretty good at operating and pulling focus, as far as keeping things in focus and operating somewhat cleanly. But, the more you're trying to do yourself, the more your brain is in a million directions, and the more you're going to miss important things. So, in that first feature, I was pulling all my own focus, and, it's reasonably in focus, but there's all these other things that I miss because, there's only so much you can see and focus on at once. And when you're trying to pull focus, I always say that's like 80% of your brain goes to that. And then maybe 15% towards operating. And that leaves 5% to look at the frame and think
Mhm.
creatively and think about light. And, so you get better at it, and you learn a lot through that sort of the trials and tribulations of trying to take on too much yourself. But, in the end, there are hard limitations as far as what you can achieve. And I learned a lot about, and it wasn't immediate. It wasn't like, oh, I did the first feature and I was like smooth sailing from there on out. But, it's been a process to learn. A big part of my job is telling a producer what I need, and knowing like where those hard limits are. Because sometimes, it's easy to say, oh, I need a dolly and I need a techno crane and I need a, condor, whatever, like 18K, whatever else. Like I can say that all day and they might just say, it's not in the budget. So, it starts the
Here's
moment.
an Aperture 650.
Exactly. Yeah. So exactly.
And a light bar.
Like in a mambo combo,
Yeah.
And, 3 sandbags. But it's like, it becomes a thing of like, when I'm being hired onto a job and I'm reading the script, hopefully I know what the budget is so I can be considering that, because there's a lot, like a script can be written in a way that you can do a lot with very little.
Yeah.
But not every script is written in that way. And, I know what my expectations are for myself. Within a meeting or two with the director, I should know what their expectations for me are. And then I need to make sure those two align enough. And if they do, and I say yes to it, I want to make sure I'm saying yes to something that I can succeed with, and not, not being set up to fail, which I kind of hate that term because it feels like somebody's out to get you. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, there's bad producers in the world, but there's a million more great producers in the world who just have a really hard job, which is to tell people no and, say, these are the resources we have and everybody needs a piece of them and nobody's going to get as much as they want. So it's my job to know, what do I absolutely need to get this done? And what are the things that, maybe I need if we want to do it in this certain way. But if I can't have that, then I need to have that hard conversation with the director about what's another way we can approach this, or ideally come to them with another option of like, okay, so, we can't get the techno crane. It's not that kind of job. But maybe there's a Steadicam move or a gimbal move or whatever, where we can accomplish something that still aligns with your creative vision, but doesn't put all of our resources towards this one shot, and then the rest of the film we're kind of like scrambling because we have nothing, and or maybe we're taking everything from our production designer, who frankly, like, if they can't do their work, it doesn't matter what then what do I do? Just, open up to a 1-2 and just hope we don't see anything, if that's not the creative, if that, sometimes that's the vision, but if it's not, then, I need to make sure my designer has what they need to, help me, make for a better frame, a better shot.
Yeah, and that was kind of your favorite part you mentioned, like the collaboration process. So I can imagine like having that conversation, not even just with the director, but with the producer, like trying to find the line of resources. Now, when you are so limited like this feature, and I'm sorry I keep going back to it because I feel like there's a lot of learning nuggets in here. But when you are dealing with such limited resources and you're kind of doing everything yourself, how do you, and I've asked this to other guests on before, but how do you keep your creative consistency when there's so many variables that are happening? What techniques or things that you do mentally to try to get into that zone?
I think for me, it all comes down to prep and how I prep a job. And I think it was really the saving grace with that film is that we prepped so much. And one of the things we did, which has become a tenet of everything I do, and I this isn't something, that me and or this director came up with, but we, through shot listing ended up creating sort essentially like a set of rules that we would follow. And I probably was too strict about it in my early films about these like rules. We would set these rules and it was like, you can't break them.
Are you able to share
But
any of the rules, like what you decide on, like a certain shot structure or a look, a feel?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, this was 2016 I shot this, so it's like I haven't, and I haven't seen it in so long that it's hard for me to even remember what our rules would have been for that. But it might be something. It might be a rule. I mean, I guess like a sort of example might be that we decide we want to be shooting long lenses on our on this particular actor maybe until a certain point in the film where something shifts and we sort of move in closer. So but there's like so many hard rules that I think would come up through that process of prep. And then likewise it was like I would just through talking through every single scene with the director. I mean, rarely, I will say, because I wouldn't quite say never, but almost never is the shot list exact to what you do on the day.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really close and sometimes it's like thrown away before you even step on set. But the process for me, not only is there like the hard rules that we've discussed and talked about and said, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But there's also just this like sort of understanding that I develop and trust I develop with the director during that process, so that on set, as things are changing and as I'm, juggling too much, because even if you're, not operating, you have a full lighting team, you have AC, you're always juggling too much as a cinematographer because it's just, there's so much to think about.
Yeah.
And so, no matter what, there's there's almost an instinctive nature of how to approach things, which at the very, hopefully I can get 75 to 90% of the way there with my instincts. And the director can just say like, actually, I think I want to be a little closer on this one, or, what about like, is this going to work? But I think for me, I don't want the director, worrying about me and my work. I want them worrying about the actors and working with them. And I've been privileged. I mean, this first feature is a great example. I've been privileged to work with a lot of directors who come from acting. And they have a varying sense of like how much they understand my job as a cinematographer in terms of like the specifics, and some really understand it and some don't think too much about it. I mean, they all think about it more than they admit, but so there's some that think about it more than others. But even still, it's like I know that they're the only ones who are going to be talking to the actors. I know that if like those performances aren't working, the film's not going to work. I've watched a million films where the cinematography had no intention, was, like flatly lit, and yet are great films because they're backed by great performances. And does it mean like they couldn't be, be taken to the next level if like these other pieces were added in? Like my philosophy is yes, but at the same time, I'll say rarely, because sometimes the cinematography is, as much a character in a particular shot or a particular scene or a particular film. But more often than not, it's like really, what are our actors doing? And and how can I best support the director to get what they need out of their
Have you
actors.
have you worked with a director before that, like, I don't want to say oversteps, but it's to a point where they focus way more on camera and lighting more than the performances? And if so, like, how did you kind of go like, hey, like, stay in your lane, or, hey, can we have a creative conversation to like figure out how to like streamline this a little bit? Cause I know a lot of directors can tend to do that. And, yeah. Have you been in that scenario before?
Not in a long time. And I think a big part of that is like when I'm interviewing for a job, I know what I bring to the table.
Yeah.
And there are times where I talk to a director and think this isn't maybe the job for me. And it isn't to speak poorly of anybody involved. I mean, there's like
Of course.
really great, stories about really great auteur directors who, I love, who sounded like they'd be really difficult to work for. But, I kind of know who I am as a cinematographer and what I need. And I think that wouldn't, I can, like I do feel it's the director's film. They can be very prescriptive,
Mhm.
but there is a level of collaboration that's necessary for me space to do what I do. And if I don't feel that, and more so don't feel trusted to bring to the table like what I'm able to bring to the table, then it may not be the film for me. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when I'm less busy, it doesn't feel as okay, but it's, at the end of the day, I think it's like every gig you take on is essentially like a resume builder for your next gig. And so you have to really make those hard choices sometimes.
Have you ever worked on a project where you kind of ran into the fire and then like midway through you were like, oh man, I really bit off more than I could chew. What was I thinking? Um, yeah, I mean, any of those situations come up at all?
Yeah, that has definitely happened. Especially really early in my career.
Hmm.
Um, Trying to think of like a very good example of like specific example of that situation. My first time shooting under fluorescent light, I was shooting a commercial, and we were shooting raw, and I was, I think, feeling a little too confident in the camera's ability to just like
Mm.
get this white balance right in post. And so, we had old HMIs. I mean, this was like before LEDs were doing anything particularly useful. So we had old HMIs that we were gelling and some tungsten units that we were gelling. And I never fully white balanced my camera on set because I thought, I can just get there later.
Yeah.
And so I tried to get everything into a place, and we were able to, create something uh, that worked fine, but it was so much work in the grade. And this was thankfully when I still worked at the production company I was at. So I was able to kind of like be there and really learn from it. But yeah, it can be really, I think it can be especially rough on any gig where you touch your own footage. And
Mm.
I think it's good for everybody to like touch their own footage once in a while and like look at it and watch dailies, because it can feel really uncomfortable to watch dailies and see all your mistakes, but you can learn so much from it. And when I used to edit, I'd sometimes edit my own stuff and be like, what am I doing? I'm like, I hold on everything for like 3 seconds and then, move on and, cut
It's
too
those
early.
commercial
And
days.
yeah, exactly. So it's
Yeah.
like, in one way, it's like, yeah, you can make it work, but why didn't I, sit with this person welding for 60 seconds? There
Yeah.
might be something really great that I'm like, I'm so, it's like you always have to be thinking about what's next and this and that, but you also like have to learn to be present because, that's the moment where, you're going to capture the magic, hopefully, that is, going to make it into the final cut. And like, it can feel like, oh, that was it. That's all I need. But then you get into the edit, and even like those extra 12 frames can make a huge difference in a commercial. Where it's like, oh, I wish I had held on that. I could, add an overlay here. I don't know, whatever it is. So it can be very frustrating to sit with your own footage, especially when you're starting out, but you can learn a lot from it. And you can grow a ton just like through that process.
Oh, I've had many of tears looking at some footage that I've done and going, what was I thinking? So I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate to that as well. So we've got a lot of learnings here,
all my
feature
failures
from all the commercials as well. But let's talk about the upside and where we're at your best project. And I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but is it part of the South by project, or is it something else that you feel that's been your creative, yes?
I mean, I will say one of the big, I don't want to say lessons I've learned. Something I put a lot of work into is learning to like be proud of what I create. Sort of on the flip side of what I was just saying, of like the frustration of sitting with your footage and seeing every mistake and dwelling on it, and some editor deciding that was the best performance, which frankly it probably was. And too bad you messed up.
Out of focus.
At the end of the day, it's not about you. Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I've had that. So I think to that end, it's like there's so many films I've worked on that I am really proud of. And there's a number of them I could focus on. My feature at South by, I think, was such a huge win. It was something I was feeling really, really nervous to watch, because interestingly, and I mention this in part because I think it's really relates to a lot of what we've been talking about, is I didn't have a G&E crew. It was like really back to those days of like doing not everything myself by any means. I mean, we had a crew of 12 people who were incredible. I had a sound mixer who was like excited to help me set up lights. So by no means was I doing everything myself, but I was doing a lot myself. And it was a 2-camera shoot. And I was told originally we could have, we had the budget for one more person outside of me and another camera operator. And I'd worked with this director and, this company before. And it was with Katie Asselton was the director. Her husband, Mark Duplass, wrote it. And we had done a film that premiered at South by last year that's going to have theatrical in May that I could easily talk about as, my favorite project ever. But our film at South by this year, their town, it was like we had to fly everybody into Maine. There was a really limited budget on it. And so we knew that every cent mattered. This was the moment of like, I know what I need to get this done. And I need a first AC for each camera. And if I can have that, I read the script, I can take on the lighting side. It's not going to be easy, but I can do it. And I know I can do it because I've worked with this director before. I know she trusts me. The first time we worked together, she was in front of the camera. So she had to trust me. And so, this time she's behind the camera, so she'll have my back. And I was, that said, I was still really nervous going into the screening because I was like, it had been a few months since I'd seen it. I hadn't seen it on a theatrical screen size just because our post was condensed a bit. And so, I worked with, my favorite colorist who I trust implicitly, and we worked really closely, and I spent a lot of time in his color suite and, watching clips. But it's still, it can be terrifying to go watch something for the first time, especially something where you're like, I know there's things because I didn't have, a gaffer. I didn't have a grip. It was just me and my sound mixer when he had availability, and one of our PAs who was amazing at like stepping up and helping. And I watched this film, and it felt like such a success. And, I heard from everybody that they were shocked when they heard, we had a crew of 12 people. We shot it in 12 days. The days were all 10-hour days, with a few of them going no longer than 8 hours. The very last day went to, 11 hours. And that was mostly because we were all like, yeah, we're here. Let's do it. We'd been treated so well, it's like you give that grace when you get it back. And so it's weird because on the one hand, I remember it being a really difficult shoot for so many reasons. And I think the director and I felt like, okay, that was cool. I'm glad we can do that. Let's make sure we have a gaffer on the next one, mostly so that the two of us can have a little more time to interface with one another. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like, we really did do it. And it, I'm so proud of what we did. I have one other project I could speak to that I think encapsulates that sort of idea of like doing something that is, I don't know, kind of feels impossible. And I don't think I could have done successfully until this point in my career, which is in July of this past year. A director friend of mine came to my wife, Kelly, and I, and pitched us this idea of shooting a film in one take. And I won't give you the full story on this, but it was another film that I knew we were, going to be, working with limited resources. And, I think the saving grace was like, the director wanted to shoot it at her house. And so I knew that we could spend a ton of time there, prepping. And so, we helped in the script development, and part of that was thinking through how the camera is going to move, because it's such an integral part of telling a story in one take. But a lot of the film really is like 7 people in a room together having conversation. And how do you do that with one camera in a way that feels dynamic, and light it in a way that you don't see the lights, or you're using practicals, which was, we found a balance of those two things, depending on, what room of the house we were in. And I think one thing, it premiered at Slamdance this year, and one thing that really, just in terms of like being proud of your own work, that really stood out to me is, and this is thinking back to that first feature, right, where I was like rolling for 3 seconds and thinking, okay, great. Or I was like kind of shifting the camera a little bit to try to, find a better shot halfway through a single, was just watching my own camera work and thinking about like how much I've matured as a cinematographer, as a camera operator, in terms of like, I'm editing this film with the director in pre-production in terms of like where we're going to go, but a lot of it's happening live. And so I'm thinking about where we are, and I'm settling into these shots and holding on them for sometimes a few minutes, just like the same 3 shot. Yeah. And then I'll move in and try to find a 2 shot and a close up. And so is this kind of like, this sort of full circle moment for me of like, so much of where I started in my career, especially my narrative career. And I think between these two projects, really seeing those challenges that, I remember thinking like, this is too much. I can't do all this. And now, like, as a more mature cinematographer, looking at these projects that had similar challenges, understanding immediately as soon as I read the script or was helping develop the script, like what those challenges would be, and trying to create a situation for myself that would allow me to be successful. And so, both of these projects would have been easy to say, no, absolutely not. There's no way we can do that. But, I think a common thread is that I trusted both directors implicitly. I'd worked with both of them before. Both of them trusted me, which is so important. And I think that goes further than anything in the world, is like having trust from your team, because if you can't trust your own instincts, it's really, really difficult to do your job. And yeah, it just became this sort of like magical sort of, I don't want to say closure, because, I have a long career ahead of me and I have a lot of mistakes yet to make. But I think returning to that style of filmmaking on these two films and finding a lot more success, and feeling really proud of my work despite those like challenges, was a big moment for me.
That's amazing. So you're saying you're not done. Obviously, there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more to learn. Where do you have any kind of sense of where you want to go? With like your style, the types of movies that you want to shoot. What's the pinnacle for you?
I think just continuing to do this work at all is such a challenge. There's so many reasons that like working in this industry is seemingly impossible at times, but just keeping on is such a win, especially, after the strikes and so many changes and technology and lots of things that are kind of like, it feels like we're constantly facing, more challenges than we can begin to understand. The fact that like I've come out of the last 3 years, feeling like I've experienced so much success, even amidst like, slowdowns and, sort of having to do some things that, maybe don't quite have the budget of things that, I may have shot before the strikes and this and that. It's like, I think just looking at all of that is a win in of itself. One thing I've taken away from the last, really the last even 8 years of my career, is understanding that who I'm working with matters more than anything else. So I, think about who I'm working with, the story I'm telling, both from a creative perspective in terms of like, what do I get to do with the camera and what, what is this script, but also what is the heart of the story? And like, is this something that is going to make the world a better place to exist? Is it something that like I'm going to fight for because I know like the world needs a story, or just, it's a great escape piece because it's like a silly comedy and we need that too. Yeah. Of course there's the money piece, and then also like, how am I going to grow through this experience? And so those are the 5 things I look at in every job I take on. And I think for me, it's just like continuing to know that I'm pushing myself and growing and trying new things and scaring myself on each and every job. I think as long as I know that, I know I'm being successful.
Do you think you've locked down a particular style or gravitate to a particular genre that you personally creative like? I mean, obviously you've got your your key things that like this is what will determine I'm going to work on this project. But things that like little nuggets that you're like, man, I really love doing romantic comedy, or I really love doing a drama. And have you pinpointed a style for yourself that you feel like you're like, that's kind of my thing?
Yeah. I mean, I hate being put in a box. That said, I do think when I look at my work, there are threads that tie it all together. I think I have a pretty diverse portfolio. In terms of genres, there is no like I'm open to anything. But I really love character, and I love telling stories about character and characters through the camera, through lighting, through camera placement, and our the way the film is structured, even editorially, which is something that I think about a lot, even if it's not my primary job. I am trying to like give the puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And so I hope that when somebody looks at my work, they see work that really reflects the heart and the emotionality of each story that I'm trying to tell. And I don't actively try to make work that looks different for the sake of looking different, but I do try really hard to make work that is specific to that script. And I try to separate myself from that as much as I can. However, I also know that I am an artist. I have an ego, even if it's, like, I don't mean that in like a toxic way. I think we all have an ego. I think you have to, as an artist, have an ego, because it's part of like putting yourself into your work, into your creative process. And so for me, I think there's an element of myself and everything I do, even if two projects might look fairly different from one another, because one is, a comedy that maybe isn't quite high key, because I'm not quite a high key DP. I can say that fairly comfortably, but is more in that sort of traditional, closer to the traditional comedy world, and a horror film that is like all in the shadows and dark and slashes of light. So I enjoy the challenge of like new thing, new approach. But at the same time, I also know that there are things that I'm drawn to and things that I am not.
Now, is there a style or a type of movie that you would love to shoot? Like, is there something you're like, oh man, I'd love to do a Western, or I'd love to do an action piece?
Yes, both of those.
Like,
yeah, please. I would love to do both of those. Absolutely. I haven't done a proper action film and would find that so much fun. And I haven't done a proper Western either. And I think that could be, both of those would be, I mean, I'm always like, what have I not done? I want to do that. So both of those are super exciting. Both of those genres specifically are very exciting to me. Also, I've done things that are sci-fi light probably, but it's hard to do. You need a lot of money to do sci-fi proper. And while that money, like that sort of like threshold is coming down, looking at a film like The Creator, being able to do that for, I want to say they had 80 million. Sorry to Oren and Greg if I'm wrong about that, but
I mean, I got 80 million in my couch right now, so I mean,
let's do it. Let's make a movie.
Let's
make a movie. We should make a movie. 80 million. I think we can make something really special. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we absolutely could. I mean, 80 million. I mean, we could probably get at least 2 cameras, I would think, right?
Yeah. or we could put that money into something else.
Oh yeah, we probably have some other things to pay for, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
right?
great.
Maybe audio. We could probably get a dedicated audio person. Maybe.
Yeah. I guess to answer your question, it's like I always want to shoot the next thing that I haven't done before. I always want to do it differently. So like I've done a one take movie. I thought like you can only do one of those. or else I don't know, people will have feelings about you doing more than one of those. But honestly, after I did it once, I was like, yeah, I would do that again.
Oh, you would? Okay. I feel
Absolutely.
like they're unusual challenge on one take movies, especially on more on an indie side. I'm assuming it's an
Yeah.
independent film.
Yeah. It
That I
would
mean,
need to
that's
be
really
quite a
hard.
bit different, but I would definitely do it again. It felt like, oh, this is just another genre of filmmaking. You know, this is just another way to tell a story. And there's no reason that I should only be allowed to do that once.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I loved hearing your story from going to commercial work all the way to shooting feature films, and I'm very excited to see a Western and or a action adventure film from you very soon. And I'm very excited to see what else is coming from you at some point, hopefully soon. I would love to, have you share with the audience if there's anything you want them to check out that you've done, and maybe even share some socials so that people can follow you, and continue on the Sarah adventure.
Amazing. Well, my Instagram handle is Sarah with an H. Sarah Makes Movies. So come check me out, follow along. I try to share what I'm up to. I also have a website, sarahmakesmovies.com. And, a good chunk of my work is up there if you want to just scroll through and see things. And beyond that, my film Magic Hour that premiered at South by in 2025 is hitting theaters in May. We're doing New York and then LA, and then beyond in a more national release from there. And I'm still waiting for details on exactly what that's going to look like. But please, if you could do anything for me, it would be come watch that film in a theater, because not only does that help me as a filmmaker to, but it helps all indie filmmakers, and it helps theaters, which we desperately need right now. Really, nothing beats seeing a film in a theater. And if it can be an indie film and you're supporting filmmakers who made something with a ton of heart, very little expectation beyond that, I think that's the best.
Yeah, I try to tell so many people, support your cinema. Go to the movies, go see it in the theater. If you don't like the theater you're at, there's got to be another one that you could see, but definitely support cinema. So many people that love what they do and they put so much heart and soul into it, including yourself. Go see films. But thank you so much for coming. We are out of time, and I'm so happy we got to talk. And thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your story and sharing your render time with me.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. I always like to end each one of my podcasts going, what's your render time? We'll see you again soon. I always like to end each one of my podcasts going, what's your render time? We'll see you again soon.